is a small instructional video on how you can tell whether a melody has a 1, or 4, or a 5 chord. Actually, many chords behind it, but the method is the same. Most of the melody notes in a tune will have chord tones in it, and when they don't, still the chord tones will be in important places. So you have an assignment to figure out, for instance, what chord is being played with this quick switch exercise at any time. And I provided audio where I played the melody of the quick switch with a chord underneath. And the important step here is to first off know how to spell the chords for the key. So a 1 chord in the key of D would be D, F sharp, and A, right? And a 4 chord in this key would be G, B, D. And a 5 chord, of course, would be A, C sharp, and E. Right? And you can use a combination of your ears and your theory knowledge when you have notation. So for instance, this is my 1 chord right here, D, F sharp, A. And you see how there's an F sharp, a D, and an A? That almost assuredly means that this is going to be harmonized by a 1 chord or a D chord in this case. So you'll hear the music go like mi, do, or mi, there we go, mi, do, so. And then on the next measure, we're not on the notes of that chord anymore. The chord of necessity is going to have to change. And if you look, there's a G and a B there, and that matches up really well with the G, B, D chord, right? So mi, do, so, when the chord changes, you can hear it change. Here it's not 1 anymore, and then you can guess that it's 4 2 different ways. One is that the notes of the melody sort of encapsulate notes from the 4 chord, and the other one is you can hear functionally, like here's 1, here's not 1, but not ready to come right back or push us back to 1. We can go back to 1, that's not a problem from a compositional point of view, but you can hear function-wise, home, something else. Now if I do a 5 chord, you hear this note right there? That's T. That's from the So Ti Re. In this case it's a C sharp. And this C sharp is pulling us back to there. So you can hear function, right? So when you do these, look at the notes as you're trying to figure out and listen to the audio. And the notes can tell you whether you're on a certain chord. For instance, here, I'm going to switch hands here. This one right here, we're in the key of B flat. So B flat, D, F is my 1 chord, right? E flat, G, B flat is my 4 chord, and E flat chord. And my 5 chord is an F chord. You can hear that T wanting to pull to Do. So we can see this first melody goes mi, so, and then la, fa, mi, re, mi. And when I look at that, I think, well, the first 2 notes probably are a chord, and the next 2 notes are probably from a chord, and then it's not always certain that it stays the same, but you'll listen and you'll hear that there's a chord played for the first part, and then the next part, and then finally, so you can hear with your ears that the chord is harmonized on, the first 2 beats, the next 2 beats, the next 2 beats, next beats, and the last one. That's not true for every single one of these, so you have to listen. But you can tell that the notes in the first 2 beats line up visually from a theory point with the 1 chord, B flat, D, and F, right? And then the next 2 are not from that chord. And the D, which is the note mi, is only from that chord. And re is only from a certain chord. And you can also listen for that. Now the other way you can listen and confirm without going to an instrument is if you can sing Do, you'll hear. For instance, if the chord progression was right, so if you can sing Do and hum that quietly, you'll hear that matches up very nicely, and that feels like home. That's the one chord. And we are looking at this top box right here. And then when he goes and changes chords, you can hear it's a different chord, but somehow Do or the B flat is still in there. And that would line up with the 4 chord, which is Fa La Do, or E flat, G, B flat, right? And then we come back to this chord. Sounds like the beginning chord again, and I'm still singing Do, and it still sounds fine with the key. But when I get to here, you can hear that it's clashing with it. Do is not in this chord, and the melody note's Re. And if you know your solfege, you'll know that Re is part of the So, Ti, Re, or early So, Ti, Re, Ti, So. So we're singing Do and and it doesn't match, but if I go down to T, that works, right? Because the 5 chord has T in it. And then back to So you can do what we call humming a test note. Do is a nice one because it's easy to hear and easy to sing, and if the chord matches with that, then you're either on the 1 chord or the 4 chord, and you can usually tell whether it feels like home or away, right? And then if it doesn't match up with Do, it's probably because it's the 5 chord. It's got T, which is right next door to that. And that's why it sounds dissonant and unstable. And you can sort of just go like, and when you suspect this is a 5 chord, you go down to T, and if that fits, it's a 5 chord. And my last one, it has to resolve back up. You can do that with Do and T for the Do is in the 1 and 4 chord. Not, and T is in the 5 chord. You can do it for other notes too. Like you could pick So, right? So, and So is common to 1, Do, Mi, So, and to 5, So, Ti, Re, right? But it's not in the 4 chord. So if you got this note here and you go, I'm looking at the first melody again. I'm going to my next chord. It doesn't quite fit. So this chord doesn't have So in it. So I bet it's going to be a 4 chord, which is Fa, La, Do. And then the next chord is again. And if this is a 5 chord, and it sounds different from my 1 chord, So should still be in it. So try that out, okay? Again, you can visually inspect what notes would be supported by the chords, okay? You can listen to the chords themselves and hear for differences and confirm that the notes are part of the chord or not part of the chord. And then, you know, you can play the sing Do and T. Do is in 1 and 4, but not in 5, so T would need to be sung there. Or you can sing So, and that's in the 1 and the 5 chord and harmonizes nicely there, but it doesn't harmonize in the 4 chord because it's not part of that, okay? Now, be careful. Sometimes you have non-chord tones, like here, on this one here, this first chord. And it's like, usually these notes that pass by step are, if you sing them long enough, you can hear they're dissonant. Doesn't match, but it's very transient because we immediately go to which is in the chord. So you can hear that this note and that note are in the chord, but these ones are not because the chord doesn't change in the harmony accompaniment. However, on this exercise, you will find that there are lots of non-chord tones, and if they skip into them, it can be very dissonant at the time. Or if they stick on them, they can be dissonant. For instance, with this guy right here, if you hear this, first off, we're in the key of D again. So there's my 1 chord and 4 chord, and then my 1 chord and my 5 chord and my 1 chord, right? Now, the majority or the anchor notes in this will be according to the chord you're on, but you can have non-chord tones too. For instance, so you can hear that this note is dissonant and resolves in, and that note is dissonant and resolves in. So probably the beats 1 and 3 are your chord tones, right? Similarly, you can get to the end of something. Let's look at here, right? So it's like, everything sounds like it's in the chord. And then we have, well, 2 of those notes will be in the chord and 2 of them won't be, right? But when we get to the end here, one of those notes is not in the chord and the other one is, and you can hear that there's tension and release, right? So the first note resolves to the second note, which is in the chord. So I think that's a chord tone and that's not. It requires some listening and some experimentation and investigation on your part. Again, looking and spelling the chords that they should be, 1, 4, and 5 can give you a really important leg up in determining what the chord might be or should be. Okay? And it gets a little trickier when you have non-chord tones spread out in there, but it's still the same principle. All right, I hope this was useful. Use the same technique when you're trying to figure out the melodic dictations as well. You figure out the chords, even though we're not notating the chords in the melodic dictations. I provided you with audio that has them there. If you can figure out what chord we're on, then that can tell you what the stable notes are, and then you can hook the non-stable or dissonant notes, non-chord tones that are in the melody on those. All right?